Hey everybody, it's Jason from the Texas Gun Vault, and once again I'm coming to you with another field strip video. And in today's field strip we're going to be taking apart for cleaning and maintenance a Vector Arms V53, and this is an HK53 clone. But while I have this gun into the Texas Gun Vault, there's a couple other things that I would like to show you when it comes to this gun as compared to other firearms like a real HK53. Because this is a clone, one of the things I want to show you is many people's issues they have with these aftermarket receivers. Sometimes they are a little bit out of spec, and because my friend who is an SOT or Special Occupational Taxpayer is visiting, he is also letting me use his full auto trigger pack for this disassembly so I can compare and show you the difference between a full auto trigger pack and a semi-auto one and show you how that works. So we have a lot to unpack here. So let's start this field strip by dropping the magazine, ensuring there is no ammunition in it, setting that aside. Then of course we will pull the charging handle back, lock open the bolt, and visually inspect the chamber, and it looks like we are clear. Now we'll make sure the gun is on safe, and the first thing we're going to need to do is remove the rear push pin. And this is going to be the first issue I'm going to talk about when it comes to these receivers being a little bit out of spec. I've dealt with a few HK clones in the past, and one of the big issues is the rear push pin, because for some reason many of these companies cannot get the length of the receivers right, and when you put the lower on and the stock on, they don't always line up perfect. And this is an example of this. So this push pin is held in here really tight. So the first thing I'm going to have to do is use a punch and a hammer. Most likely, if this was a real HK53, you could simply push that through with your thumb because everything would line up, but this one does not. So we need to hammer this one through. And as I mentioned, this is a very common issue with many of the HK clones. So there is our push pin. We can of course set that aside. Now we can extend the stock, and we can remove the stock from the back of the receiver. This can also be on here a little bit tight. There that is. We can set that aside. Now the next thing we're going to do is drop the lower receiver, and this is a full auto lower receiver. As I mentioned, I will show you a semi-auto one and the differences in just a moment. The next thing we can do is pull out the recoil spring, and then we can use the charging handle and pull the bolt back. And I would recommend putting your hand at the end of the receiver so the bolt doesn't come flying back, because it is locked in there. And now we can remove the bolt. And now in order to separate the bolt from the carrier, you're going to turn the bolt counterclockwise. And this is one of the things that is different than an MP5. So we're going to turn it this way. And once it reaches a certain point, we can simply pull the bolt off. You can see those rollers in there. Then we can take the locking piece and rotate it counterclockwise. And when it reaches a certain point, it will pop out of the carrier. We can pull the locking piece out. We can pull the firing pin and the firing pin spring out as well. And something to note about this is on the rifle calibers, when it comes to the HK clones and the actual HKs, is these have a bolt claw. I'm not really sure what this part is called. The MP5s lack this, and so when the bolt is engaged, this little claw grabs the bolt and helps keep it locked in place. And that's why when it comes to the charging handles on these firearms, they have a lever to help you get a lot of leverage. And that's why they're a little bit harder to unlock. So that is the field strip of the Vector Arms V53 and HK53 clone. So now let me wipe this down, clean it up. I'll show you some differences between this and an MP5 and a semi-auto lower receiver. So we got this gun all cleaned up, oiled, and ready to go back together. And before we do that, as I mentioned, I wanted to show you a couple of things about how a full auto legacy HK gun works. And as I mentioned, my friend who is an SOT is visiting, and he's letting me use his full auto lower for this example. And so this has an auto sear, which is tripped by this little lever right here. And so for comparison, I brought out a semi-auto lower. And as you can see, we have the trigger, we have the hammer, we have the disconnector, we have the ejector. Everything is pretty simple in this. And the difference is this lever right here. In fact, this lever is not only the auto sear, it's actually a safety. Even when the lower is in the semi-automatic position, when the hammer is back, you can't fire it. The only way it can be fired is when the bolt goes forward and pushes down on this lever. It releases the hammer, so the sear now can be released. And so if the gun is set to be in full auto, which would be this setting, essentially, as long as the trigger is pulled back, every time the bolt comes up and hits this lever right here, it will release the hammer. So that will release the sear. But in the semi-automatic setting, this acts as a safety, ensuring that the bolt is completely closed. In fact, I kind of wish that they were allowed to put that on the semi-automatic lowers, because that would mean that you have an extra safety in there ensuring the gun is in battery and you won't have an accidental out of battery detonation. So if you do want to get these packs out of here, this one is in a Magpul lower. All you have to do is remove the safety selector switch. This one comes out simply with an Allen wrench. You can take off one of the sides, and like all MP5s or HK legacy gun lowers, you move the safety selector switch up and it simply pops out, and then now you can remove the complete trigger pack and it comes out like that for cleaning. And that is it. So let's put that back together, line everything up. You can put in the safety selector switch, and it just needs to go perfectly in there. Line everything up, and it pops in. And then we can put on the lever on the other side. These lowers can all be different, just depending on how these levers come off, but it's not too much work depending on the one that you have. The older style are the easier ones, the non-ambi ones. And now that pack is back together. The other thing I wanted to show you was the difference between this bolt and carrier and an MP5. Because the MP5 is chambered in 9mm, this one uses a lot less pressure. And so in order to get this off, it's really easy to move the bolt over and remove it. And when this gun is locked, essentially meaning these rollers are out, there is no claw mechanism holding this in place. So the bolt can just easily and freely move on that locking piece. But when you start to get into higher pressure calibers like 5.56, you're going to need this extra piece right here to hold the bolt in. And that is something that you need to be aware of when putting the gun back together. So let's start by putting this bolt and carrier back together. First thing I'll do is I'll take my firing pin and my firing pin spring and the locking piece. I'll put all of that together. I will insert it into the carrier, and you'll notice on the locking piece there is a little ledge up here, and that's going to correspond to a cutout in the carrier. You insert that, and you're going to push down on the locking piece and turn it clockwise. In fact, you're going to turn it almost 180 degrees to where it will look like that. Now we can take our bolt and we can put it over the locking piece. And here's where you have to be really, really careful when it comes to this claw. If you're thinking it's like an MP5, you might inadvertently push this bolt all the way on, rotate it back into place, and now you'll notice these rollers are all the way extended and you cannot move that bolt at all. And so with the rollers like this, you cannot insert it back into the receiver. It won't fit. So the only way to get this claw to release is to take it back off, rotate it. Then you have to pull it out a little bit where that claw will not engage the bolt. And you kind of have to find where that sweet spot is. And then once you find it, you can rotate it back over. And that's going to be right there. I can rotate it over, and now you can see the rollers are not engaged. And as you hopefully saw, that spot on that carrier is a very precise location. So if you don't put it together like this, you cannot reassemble your gun. And that's one of the big differences between this and the MP5. So now let's put our recoil spring in there, and let's drop this whole carrier back into the receiver. And once again, if you did not do this right, these rollers would be out and you could not reinsert it. And I did it right, so the whole carrier and recoil spring assembly are now back in the gun. We'll now take our lower and we can put it onto the upper. And as you can see, because the receiver is not 100% in spec, the two holes do not line up, even though the lower is pushed all the way forward. The next thing we'll do is put on our stock. We'll slide it on from the rear. And now, in order to get things kind of lined up, I'm going to put it barrel down and push down on the stock, get some pressure on it. And then it's kind of lined up here. And because the receiver is out of spec, I will now have to drive in this push pin with a hammer. Sometimes my thumb will do it. Almost got it. So now I'll take this hammer and get it in all the way. And that is how you field strip and reassemble a Vector Arms V53 or an HK53 clone. And of course, you want to ensure the gun is operational. And there it is. So it looks like we are good. It is not an easy field strip, and you have to have some special knowledge, and not everything from the MP5 carries over to this gun. So I hope you found this field strip informative, and I hope you learned something about the mechanics of these guns. So let me know what you think in the comment section below, and I hope this video helps somebody in the future. And as always, thanks for watching.